If you feel like you are stuck eating low carb, even though you know deep down carbs might not be evil, this episode is for you. Today, I'm sharing my personal journey from strict keto and paleo to eating hundreds of grams of carbs daily. You'll learn exactly how I overcame the biggest obstacle to change, which wasn't information. It was really about my identity. I'll reveal the physical changes I experienced as I reintroduced carbs, the mental obstacles I had to overcome, and the practical strategies that finally helped me break free so you can do the same. Welcome to Wits and Weights, the show that helps you build a strong, healthy physique using evidence, engineering, and efficiency. I'm your host, Philip Pape, and today's episode's a bit different because I'm actually interviewing myself, which I'm always hesitant to do in terms of sharing my personal journey, but people are always asking, and I think it's important to understand that we all struggle with the same things, just in different ways. I personally used to have very strict diets. I've done everything from Slim Fast and Atkins way back in the day to strict keto, paleo, various low-carb diets, and even other weird diets that are probably outside the scope of today's episode. And today I eat easily over 300 grams of carbs every day with better performance, with more muscle, with zero guilt. I love to eat food now, and I can enjoy it and make progress. And I've worked with hundreds of clients who are able to do the same, some of whom were very, very hesitant to introduce carbs, some of whom even introduced more carbs and said, whoa, what is going on with bloating or quick weight gain or things that are explainable, but very frustrating and hard to wrap your head around until you understand how carbs work in those transition periods. And I want to try to touch on those different things today. But what I did is I posted in our Facebook community, which is free. You guys can join it. Use the link to join anytime. And I asked you all, hey, what would you ask me if this was an interview about that topic? And you sent me a ton of questions, and I'm effectively going to ask myself those questions today and answer them more or less off the cuff as if it was an interview. I would be remiss if I didn't say this episode wasn't inspired by one person in particular, and that was listener Alex B, who asked a really insightful question that resonated with me. And I actually sat on it for a few months before I recorded this episode because it sounded like a heavy topic for me to tackle. And she wrote about struggling to bridge that gap between knowing the science behind carbs, right? So many of you know the science, or you've heard this show and you know it. Many of you don't. You're new to the show, or you're new to evidence-based nutrition and maybe still think there's a problem with carbs, they're evil, they make you get fat, whatever. And kind of having that knowledge, but then still finding it difficult to break your old habits or let yourself, give into it and experiment with these because of these old habits, whether it's keto, paleo, or something else. And honestly, this could apply to any restrictive diet, carnivore, veganism, vegetarianism, whatever, that you've imposed on yourself because you think it's the right thing to do from a health perspective, not from a values-based perspective. That's a different topic, but just from a health perspective because of what you've heard or read. Or maybe you've gotten some short-term results, or others have gotten some of those results. And so today isn't about spewing more information at you. I have plenty of shows that do that. It's actually about how you change your behavior despite the fear, despite the identity you've built, despite years of conditioning. Sometimes we condition ourselves. Sometimes our upbringing and society and the content we consume has conditioned us. And so that's what we're going to do today, right? And I reached out to our Facebook group and they sent me some fantastic questions. We're going to cover those. So before we get into it, if you enjoy the show in general, if you want to connect with people who like these sorts of topics and really to dig in and understand their identity, who want to know what works for them, who want to personalize and not just be given macros or templates, that's what we do in our community. It's a free community. It's called Wits and Weights in Facebook. I will give you the link to click in the show notes. And that is a place where we have these conversations. We support each other through our transitions of nutrition experience, right? We share our wins. We get our questions answered. We deal with some tough, vulnerable topics as well in a I hate to use the word safe space, but effectively it's a non-judgmental place where, anybody who's negative and doesn't need to be generally gets the boot. So if you're looking for a supportive place, that's it. If you want to get away from the politics and the negativity, that's where it happens. And that's where this stuff came from for today's episode. So just head to Facebook and search for Wits and Weights, or just click the link in the show notes, request to join, And I'd love to see you in there. All right, so we're going to start with the origin story, right? Every hero's journey. And I'm not calling myself a hero. I just love the idea of the hero's journey from, for example, Star Wars, or really any great story arc. What first attracted me to low carb diets? And there are a lot of them out there. When we say low carb, what do we mean? We mean that controlled for calories, or maybe and sometimes you have no idea what the calories are, you're trying to reduce the amount of carbs you eat and increase your protein and or fats, right? The three macros: carbs, protein, fats. And my history of dieting before about 5 years ago was throw it on the wall and see what sticks and see if it works based on the content I was consuming, which tended to be in the early days, diet books from Barnes and Noble or random forums on the internet, maybe some influencers here and there, although I was never really into social media. So that wasn't a thing for me, 5-10 years ago. We're talking from the early 2000s to like the late 2000s or late 20 teens. And I never really had a concrete goal other than I'm unhappy with my body. I'm a little bit fluffy at times, or skinny, fat, frumpy. I didn't like how I looked at the pool without my shirt on. And I just had a bunch of insecurities around that. And so I would primarily be focused on losing weight. Let's just put it that way, like many of us are. I didn't think about energy, health, any of that, especially when I was younger. And so in the early 2000s, the first diet experience I could remember is during college on my internship. This is around the year 2000. I believe now in hindsight, emotionally eating due to some things that happened that I'm not going to go into details on, some personal relationship things that happened at a young age. And I wouldn't say I was depressed, but I was definitely finding comfort in food. And it would be things that had a lot of calories. Like, you guys know Friendlies? They started up here in Massachusetts. I'm in Connecticut, and they have these ice cream sundaes, right? I love ice cream still to this day. And I still enjoy ice cream, but I would get these massive Reese's peanut butter cup sundae things, which you look at the calories now, they're probably like 1,500 calories. And I would have that just about every day. I'll put it this way. I couldn't help myself, right? You guys know that experience. And I gained a lot of weight. Let's just put it that way. I went from about averaging 165 at 5'9" to about 210 pounds. Okay. Totally unchecked, no training, no exercise, none of that. And a lot of the gurus I had been following at the time were around the Atkins community. And so when I got back to college for my junior year, I said, I'm going to do this thing. And I cut out all fruit, vegetables, anything that was a carb. I basically ate meat without a bun, and oh man, I can't even remember. It was like literally just meat. Okay. It almost reminds me of carnivore. I'm doing this off the cuff, guys. So it's hard for me to go back in that far back in time. And what would happen is I started to lose a lot of weight. Of course you do, because what happens when you cut out carbs? What happens when you cut out most processed foods? You lose a lot of water weight because of the carbs, but you also cut your calories significantly. And so I lost a lot of weight, but I also had some very unpleasant digestive side effects, let's just say. And the other thing is, when you have a higher fat diet, we do know that it can help with satiety. Even though today I recommend using protein and fiber for satiety, that is fullness. We do know from the keto community, for example, and carnivore, that fat can be satiating as well. And so I was able to go through my day not feeling too hungry, suppress my appetite. I had a lot of water weight loss, a lot of scale drops due to the lack of calories. And, I gradually brought it down to where my scale weight was maybe in the 170s again. And I definitely felt better about myself, finding that something could work, and I knew something was behind it, but I didn't know calories. I didn't know macros. I didn't know any of that stuff back then. And also the other thing that comes to mind is how we defined carbs. So back then, to me, any carb was bad, right? Like carb equated to sugar, equated to bad, equated to that's how you get fat. I believed it to the extent that I didn't even know about calories or energy, right? Now we're much more educated on that, given social media, and people will still say, oh no, it's not about energy balance. It's about the types of calories, or it's about carbs specifically, regardless of energy balance. And that's just false. Like, we know energy balance is behind whether you gain or lose weight. Macros and nutrients come into play with a lot of other factors like body composition, energy, digestive health, all the other things, right? So that was my first foray into low carbs. I didn't know why it worked. I just know it worked. And I probably sustained that for a couple of years. And then I realized I didn't like to eat just hamburger patties, right? And I'm kind of oversimplifying, but effectively it was that simplistic of a diet, which means it was that highly restrictive of a diet. Going into my 20s and even 30s, new diets started to pop up, okay? And I want to say for about a 5 to 10 year period, I didn't even diet at all. I just ate whatever. And I gained a bunch of weight. And this was into when I got married in that was 2006. And then around 2000, I want to say 8, 9, I discovered paleo. I think that was around the time. I discovered primal, paleo, and I just jumped in whole hog into that world. The idea of ancestral health, of, okay, well, our ancestors didn't have access to grains or dairy. So of course they couldn't eat those things. They also they were opportunists. So they hunted and gathered, and they had this feast or famine approach. And I basically went all in on no grains, no dairy, which basically means little to no carbs. Because yeah, you can quote unquote eat fruit, but I didn't eat a lot of fruit or veggies at the time. I was very picky. You see, that's the other part of this. I did paleo, and I did that for probably 5 to 10 years. And that was the most dogmatic, I'll say, religious zealotry that I got into when it came to a diet. I had probably like 20 books on paleo. I had all these recipe books. And I have to say, you can make a lot of great meals when you're thinking paleo because it's a lot of meat and vegetables. During that time, my wife helped me get past my pickiness when it came to vegetables, let's say. And that's a whole other story. But it was helpful that I was incorporating those, and I was eating a lot of whole foods. And there was a lot of things I was adding in as a result of paleo that I would say is a good thing. That is lean meats and vegetables and fruits, whole foods, eggs, I believe. But I wasn't eating dairy, and I wasn't eating, actually, I forget about eggs, and I wasn't eating any grains whatsoever, which in my mind was carbs. And I want to take a little side tangent here because carbs are highly misused as a term. Carbohydrates are found in apples, and they're also found in Snickers. But you know what else is found in Snickers? Is lots of fat and sugar. Now, you could say, well, sugar is a carb. Yes, but lots and lots of added sugars in a form that has been engineered beautifully to look good, to taste good, to have a multi-sensory, time-based, almost orgasmic experience when you eat it. And I'm serious. You guys know what I'm talking about. Pick your most favorite, delicious, indulgent thing. I don't care how processed it is. Okay. I use Snickers as an example because of the way it's designed. The way it's designed with layers of chocolate and caramel and peanuts. And is it said nougat? I don't even know that's in there. Maybe not. But different layers and it's pre-processed. Now, this is the disgusting thing about a lot of ultra-processed foods is they're effectively ground up ingredients that are smushed together in an engineered way to be highly palatable, delicious, and easily consumed. And then you're still hungry and you want to eat more. And hence the slogan, you can't have just one. So when you think of carbs, do you think of pizza and ice cream and donuts and Doritos? Or do you think of oats and rice and apples and potatoes? Big difference, right? However, the anti-carb groupthink lumps them all together. And when people say I cut carbs, I'm like, what do you mean? So I want you to ask yourself that question, what do you mean? So for me, they were all poison. They were all lumped together. They were all like sugar in my mind, including fruits. And we know that's not the case today. So I did that. And at the same time, I started CrossFit. I've talked about CrossFit before early on in one of my earliest podcasts. I did that for about 8 years, from like 2010 to 2018. And throughout that, most of that time, I also stuck with some version of paleo or low carb, eventually getting more into the keto side of things, which there's not a lot of differences. I'll be honest. It's basically a high fat approach that didn't really account for protein or calories. It was just, what can't you eat? What can you not eat? What do you have to cut out? So and throughout this whole time, I more or less maintained my weight, but I was also doing CrossFit and a lot of cardio, and I was kind of stressed out from the workouts a bit. Didn't really look forward to them usually. And it didn't do anything for my physique at all. Right? Like I could lift, when I started, I probably could squat, 95 pounds or something small like that. And then by the time I was quote unquote done with CrossFit, I was only up to 225 on my squat. And I hear stories like this all the time. Unless you focus on strength, you're not going to get it up. Currently my squat is over 300, my deadlift's over 400, my bench is well over 200, right? Just the numbers you would expect from even average strength for somebody who's doing strength training. And I wish I started earlier, but I didn't. But that's a whole different thing when we talk about training. However, it's important because I wasn't training the right way, and therefore I wasn't thinking of eating to train the right way. And I never knew that carbs could be beneficial, nor was I training in a way where they were going to be that beneficial, if that makes sense. In other words, the vast majority of the population is either sedentary or they're active, but not in a purposeful way, such that they're not utilizing carbs in the way that carbs can be highly effective, which we're going to get into in this episode and why I wanted to do this. So that brings me to the next part of the story, which is the breaking point. And here's my first question from a listener where Tony asked, after essentially being anti-carb, what cracked that shell? So in late 2019, I would say the breaking point is ironic. It's ironic because it happened around Halloween, which is around the same time as my birthday. And I decided yet again to go cold turkey from carbs. And I did it by avoiding the candy drawer. So I had gotten into a habit of not, I don't want to say sneaking, but those of us who understand emotional eating, you do it in a way that you feel guilty, right? You feel like, I know I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I can't help myself. F it, like I'm already doing it. And then each day it's like you think you're going to reset and you don't, right? Can you relate? So for me, it was all sorts of snacks, but especially candy, which, people say that's like eating like a kid. Well, yeah, a lot of us, that's what we're doing, the way we eat, right? So I would take the candy out of the candy drawer. And of course, that means I was deliberately going out and buying it to put there. I didn't have the restraint like my wife did in terms of just eating anything in moderation. She's great at that. She's really good at that. Just, I'll say naturally, she's always been that way. And I'm not, so I can overeat. And that Halloween/birthday, I said, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to have the candy for Halloween. I'm going to go cold turkey. And I did that for about 2 or 3 months. Again, thinking I need to cut out carbs. That is going to be the solution. But, did I feel miserable? Did I feel awful not being able to eat all the things during the holidays? I didn't have energy. I didn't feel like doing my CrossFit, like the whole thing. And so the turning point came, and this is to answer Tony's question. It took time, right? It wasn't like a black and white, is with the mental fatigue and the performance stalls and being unhappy about my body and the social rigidity and like all of this stuff. I said, man, there's got to be something better, because I see people out there succeeding. I even see guys in what was the CrossFit gym and now is more of a strength and conditioning gym with great physiques. They seem energized. Like maybe it's just genetics. I had always thought that to that point, like it's just genetics. So I asked my trainer, and again, I've talked about this story before, so I'm not going to get too far into it, but I asked my trainer, Andrew, like, what do I need to do to get a better physique and kind of figure this out? And that's when he turned me on to, he's like, you just need to lift for strength, big lifts, progress over time. Let's forget all the WODs, the workouts of the day, forget all the conditioning, just go for strength. And that got me down the path of going to Google and YouTube and podcasts and learning about strength. And it turned me on to guys like Eric Trexler and Andy Morgan with their muscle and strength pyramids, to starting strength, of course, and to that whole world. Eventually into the nutrition side of it about a year after that, which I'm getting to. So what shifted is I started to train for strength. The pandemic hit. That's kind of almost an afterthought at this point, but it did cause me to have to build my home gym for the first time instead of go to the gym, which is cool because to this day, that's what I have. I got a power rack, I got a bar, I got a plates, all that fun stuff, and started to train, squats, deadlifts, presses, overheads, just cranking the numbers up. And I heard that you had to eat a lot of food. So I just said, forget this low carb stuff, forget any diet. I'm just going to try to gain weight. Like it sounded really liberating actually to just gain weight and not care about it, because I thought, well, now this is a purposeful gain, even though it was not done optimally by any stretch of the imagination. So yeah, a lot of whole milk in there. I started consuming a lot more protein because that was part of it was, I actually need that much protein. You guys know what I'm talking about. That 1 gram per pound or even 0.8 grams per pound. When you are not paying attention to your protein your whole life, you realize you are woefully under eating that stuff. So adding more protein in, I had more whole milk, more fat, more carbs, more everything. And I started to gain. I started to gain, started to grow. But my girth started to grow as well. Okay. And I always tell this story on other podcasts, but like after I gained a bunch of strength and muscle during that first newbie phase of about a year, that's what I realized. Well, now I really need to understand even more about nutrition, because there's got to be a way to lean out. And that's where I learned about macros, flexible dieting, and the fact that we don't eat to lose weight. We eat to support our energy. We eat to support our metabolism. We eat to perform, to feel great, to, manipulate our physique at times, right? To lift optimally in the gym, all of that stuff. And so again, shout out to you, Tony, because you were there from early on when I got into the coaching side of things, and to this day push me. And also, and you will admit this, are one of the people who are a little bit afraid of carbs yourself. And it took a while even to convince you, right, that they would be helpful. You had to experiment with it, back off a bit, and then experiment again, back off until you realize, wait a minute, when I have more carbs, I tend to perform better. They're the body's preferred fuel under load. They're the body's stress reliever. They provide you the glycogen you need. They are anti-catabolic. They prevent the breakdown of muscle tissue. All the wonderful benefits of carbs that I've talked about on multiple episodes. Just go search my podcast feed for carbs. And like once I realized that I could eat and lose weight on the scale, which I still was fixated on early on. I didn't quite understand fat loss versus weight loss and body composition. It wasn't until I read a book by Layne Norton, I think it's called Fat Loss Forever, where I learned all about body fat overshooting. You looked at the studies about The Biggest Loser, all of it started to come together. I said, oh, wow. So now that I'm strength training and focused on muscle and strength, now that I'm eating for fuel and for how I feel and perform, and now that I know calories are the dial to gain and lose weight, it all came together. I could go up in weight or I can go down in weight. And if I go down in weight, I can keep training, keep the protein high, manipulate the carbs lower because carbs do get pretty low depending on your calories and fat loss. And that is how I could get the physique that I want. And I started to improve, I'll say quickly, but don't be misled that you can totally change your whole transformation in 6 months. It doesn't work that way. It does take time. I would say your first year though, you're going to see a meaningful change, but then the real kind of looking a little bit jacked or having that six pack or whatever, that starts to happen more in years 2 and 3. Like just to be realistic, unless you already have a good starting point or you have a history of this, you're pretty lean, whatever. So kind of answer the question, the aha moment took me a year and a half to realize that carbs were just a great tool and they were useful and they were helpful. And it took me like 2 or 3 more years of doing this podcast, researching and coaching clients to be able to express that, right? To be able to talk about it in a way that made sense. So that's why a lot of you are listening. And I wanted to do this podcast because it's not necessarily easily accepted by society or even by you listening, right? And I'm not here to convince you. I'm just trying to tell my story. So then this brings me to the next part of the story where I'm going to answer Alex's original question to me. And she said, hi, you've mentioned your previous keto paleo adherence and how you've since learned better and more importantly, done better. My question is how you bridge the gap between knowledge and implementation. I'm someone who knows the science behind carbs, but I still really struggle to break my old keto paleo habits and include anything more than non-starchy vegetables and a little fruit. So there's a lot in that question, Alex, and this is why I wanted to talk to you and everyone today. And I kind of answered it somewhat already, but I would say, first of all, the habits that were hardest to break were thinking of food with like a moral judgment, that anytime I saw anything with carbs, that it was a no-no, right? That I had to avoid it. And so I think the biggest game changer for me, and this helps a lot of people that I work with, is the idea of additive nutrition, of adding in the things you need along with the things you want. So both, and being intentional, right? In the past, and many of you listening, you're not intentional about it. And by intentional, I don't mean you're intentional about cutting out a bunch of foods. No, I mean you're intentional about why you eat what you eat and including those in. And so for me, that was, okay, I know that I need to eat more carbs before and after I train along with protein, because that's going to support my training. I'm going to feel better. I know it might help to have carbs at dinner because it's going to help me sleep better. And I know that I only need so much protein and fat. And if the rest of the calories come from carbs, then carbs may be a lot higher than I used to eat. And now I have to find how to get them, right? Like it's those kinds of anchors, I would say. And I still had anxiety around carbs for a while. I would say because I had gained all that weight while lifting properly, I was wondering how much of that was associated with carbs. And I hear guys still on podcasts say, well, you just got to cut out carbs. That's how you eat better. And again, they're not talking about carbs. They're talking about carb, sugar, fat combinations like processed foods like pizza and whatnot. But instead of thinking that I have to cut them out, I think, what do I need to add in? And then what's left? And I can still enjoy other foods. And so where I'm going with all this, Alex, is, you said it's hard for me to break my old habits, include anything more than non-starchy vegetables and a little fruit. I would reflect on the psychological flexibility and your identity around that. So when I think about your struggle to break old habits, what comes to mind is things like habit loops. I don't know if you're familiar with Atomic Habits by James Clear, but the trigger reward type cues, the habit loops. And instead of thinking of carbs as this generic blob of a thing out there, be intentional. Ask yourself first, Alex, what is it about keto and paleo that you are still sticking to? Like think about the habit that you are still doing. Because you said you don't want to include more than non-starchy vegetables and a little fruit. So does that mean grains? That you don't want to include grains for some reason? And I had to break that loop when it came to paleo because I always thought grains, and then I would tie it into this whole rationale or justification about how ancestors didn't have access to that, and they have phytonutrients and they have anti-nutrients, blah, 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 blah. And then I had to slowly learn about the science of carbohydrates and the fact that consuming grains is perfectly acceptable if you can tolerate it. Some people can tolerate gluten, some can't. Some people tolerate other grains, some can't, right? And that for me, when I consume those things, I didn't seem to feel any worse, like didn't seem to affect my digestion, but it gave me an extra flexible source of energy that I needed for my goals. So part of the cue or the trigger could be like not about eating more carbs, but I'm a person who values evidence-based training and sources of energy. I know that carbs give me the glycogen I need to train really hard. And rice is a great source of carbs. I like rice. I like to prepare rice in this way and that way. And therefore, I'm going to include half a cup of rice with my next meal. And again, I'm just kind of spitballing it here with you about how to approach this for you. Like when I work with clients, Alex, everybody's a little bit different. And I know you and I talked about having accountability, meal planning, meal prepping, pre-logging. For some people, it's just like doing it, just saying, okay, I'm going to plan these things into my diet and I'm going to give it a shot and see how I feel. And then if I notice that I actually feel better, that's a good reinforcement of that loop. And so as far as the identity side of things, I think it is about feeling safe and secure, right? Like secure with your choices, not having guilt. Right now, you may feel guilty when you grab something else that's not on your list of approved things that you used to think were bad with keto. And it might require just adding one of those things in and seeing what happens and noticing that the sky doesn't fall. And if anything, you'll realize, ooh, I really enjoyed my food a little more because I had this extra ingredient. Ooh, it gave me some more energy, better sleep. Some people report better hormones or less stress, like all of those things. If you can lean into usually the non-scale victories, they call them, and tie them to these choices, you can gradually break the loops and build them in. Again, working with a coach can be helpful because they can be someone you fall back on and you can transfer some of that emotional stress over. And I love to help people do that because they might just not do it on their own and they need that push. But I'm hopefully giving you that little bit of a push here. And you could always jump into our Facebook group and just post your experience. Say, look, I brought this up with Philip. He had the podcast. It wasn't a good enough answer. So I'm posting for you guys to help me out and be specific. And we could do that. So that's just kind of my thoughts on habits, right? Like any habit, you're going to have to break it, but you break it in a positive way by adding in the thing you need and then tie it into a loop of a reward. Which leads me to the next question, which is from Christy L. And she said, what part of your identity or belief system did you have to confront or let go of when you shifted away from keto? And how did that affect your relationship with food and your body? The thing I didn't realize for years, Christy, was that I basically had disordered eating without admitting it or knowing it, right? It was disordered. It wasn't to the point of like orthorexia is an obsession with clean food. Obviously there's eating disorders, nothing like that, but more of a disordered eating of tying so much of who I was with what I ate. And the irony, as you know, is I talk about this stuff all the time now. I talk about food all the time. I track my food and everything. And yet I feel free from food, if that makes sense. In other words, I know the fact that I have dietary and psychological flexibility now is so empowering. And it gives you this sense of confidence, knowing that you can manipulate your health, your physique, your activity, your whatever, get a result you want and do it eating anything. And I say anything with quotes because again, this is not licensed to just literally eat anything whenever, right? It's in a controlled, structured way. So again, your question, what part of my identity or belief system, that's part of it, is the moral judgment on food, the disordered eating, the fact that science somehow supports that you can't eat a whole class of foods. Like to this day, and you know this from Dustin's work as well, he talks about all the time, it's like seed oils and artificial sweeteners, and like there's so many boogeymen out there. And the general default response I have to any of those, until proven otherwise, is the dosage makes the poison. And almost anything can be consumed in moderate amounts without any, negative effects. And therefore, I don't worry about those. What I do think about is how do I feel myself as an athlete? So I guess my identity and my belief system was that I could even be an athlete, that I can perform and lift weights and heck, look good. I mean, honestly, and I'm still working on it. Like we all have insecurities. It's not really about that so much as I see the result from it. And once the food freedom kicked in and I was doing the right things, which is important, right? Because some of us are not training the right way or training at all or training consistently. And that's a big piece of it. Once I was doing that, it all started to click. And then my relationship with food became very objective. I'll say, like, it's not emotional anymore, right? Even hunger now, when I experience hunger in a fat loss phase, it's like an objective feeling of, okay, I understand what that is. Like physiologically, physically, psychologically, I understand what it is now. And it takes work to get there, right? It takes a lot of work for some of us, myself included. And this is what I work with clients every day. And I'm sure you've experienced that yourself. And then it translates to your relationship with your body. Because let's be honest, when you actually get a result, when you're able to lose fat and build muscle and like improve your physique, your hormones, your metabolism, it gives you tons of confidence and it makes you walk upright. It makes you have less anxiety among people. Let's say if that's your thing, it makes you more confident to take action throughout other areas of your life. And all of that is tied up to our identity. So that's kind of what comes to mind for me. Hope it answers that question. So shout out to you, Christy, for that. I think I addressed what you were asking. And then when we get to the practical side of things, I love these questions as well because they're kind of easier for me to answer. But Jimmy Q asked, how many carbs did you go from and to? So how many carbs did I go from and to? And was there an immediate weight gain? Even if superficial, like water weight or glycogen? Unless he had other questions too. How long did it take to regulate and get used to high carb? How much more energy did you end up having at the gym, assuming you were strength training during both diets in similar fashion? Good question. So the first one, once I learned about macros and energy balance, it was actually pretty easy. Number one, anchor my protein. Okay, 0.8 to 1 grams per pound. Number two, peg my fats at around 30% of calories, give or take 10%. Number three, the rest goes to carbs. So by definition, you are now anchored by calories, protein, and a little bit by fat. I mean, the fat is flexible, right? So you're kind of anchored by calories and protein, meaning if you're trying to gain weight versus lose weight, you're going to have much different level of carbs or much different level of calories, but because the protein is anchored, the fats and the carbs are going to swing around a lot. So in actual numbers, if I'm at maintenance eating, say 2,800 or it depends on what my maintenance is at the time, but 2,600 to 3,000 calories, I'm still going to be eating 350 grams of carbs maybe. If I'm gaining, I'm going to eat a lot more than that. So like crazy amount, maybe 500. And if I'm losing, for me, most of my diets, I'm eating around 2,000 calories, maybe 1,800. Then I'm down to like a couple hundred grams, maybe less, which as you know, none of those are low carb. Now, having said that, just caveat. I have plenty of clients who have much lower metabolisms. They're smaller or, a petite female or somebody who just happens to burn fewer calories. And they might burn, let's say, 2,000 calories as their maintenance. And when they go to a diet, they're at like 1,400 calories. Well, their carbs are now probably going to drop to 120 grams, 100 grams, maybe less than 100, maybe 80 grams, maybe even 60. And then we get into what we think of as low carb or even VLC, very low carb or keto, right? So it's going to depend on the calories and then the protein, where trade-offs can always be made. And that gets into the nuances we're not going to get into today. Trade-offs can be made. Now, the keto and carnivore worlds, when they think of carbs, they think of just making it as low as possible because they care about being fat adapted and they care about ketosis and all of that, none of which matters because the glycogen is the first source of energy your body is going to seek. If it doesn't, it's going to go to fat. At the end of the day, calories are calories. Like based on how much you consume and how much you burn, you're going to store energy, whether it's consumed from glycogen, glucose, or fat, right? And I've talked about that many times as well. So the caveat is if you've been low carb for a long time, and I did the math recently, if you've been like say 50 grams of carbs for the last 2 years, you're on keto, and all of a sudden you jump to 300 grams of carbs or 400 grams of carbs, right? And I don't recommend doing that overnight. Take a week or two to do it regularly. Incrementally. When you make a jump like that, every gram of carbs results in almost a gram of glycogen stored in your liver and your muscles, which draws in about 3 to 4 grams of water. So if you did the math, you could easily gain 2 to 5 pounds with a big jump in carbs just from water weight. And that's like at almost like any body weight. So a lighter person will see that as a massive weight change and get freaked out. Conversely, when someone goes on keto and they had been consuming lots of carbs, whether it was on purpose or not, they'll say, oh my God, I just lost 5 pounds in the first week. Water weight. It's all water weight. It's water weight because the only way you lose fat is to be in an energy deficit, a true energy deficit. Okay. A pound of fat, roughly 3,500 calories of an energy deficit. Now, to be fair, if someone goes on keto, they probably are cutting out a whole bunch of foods and a whole bunch of processed foods. and thus a whole bunch of energy or calories. And they might lose fat as well as water weight. And they're probably also going to lose muscle because most of those people are not lifting weights. Some are. That's a whole separate discussion. Now, as far as how long it took to regulate and get used to high carbs, it took me like a day, And no, I say that in jest, but remember when I talked about how I started lifting, I started following starting strength and I started just eating whatever. I switched my mind at that moment to saying, look, I'm a lifter right now and I need to fuel myself. And I don't care what it takes. And so I actually didn't put any governors or regulators on how much of whatever I was eating. And I tolerate foods well. Like I'm lucky, maybe, is that the word? Like no matter how badly I've eaten in the past, my gut seems to handle things well. I don't have any allergies. I don't have any intolerances. Now, a purist or a functional doctor or somebody might say, well, you don't know until you go on an elimination diet and like get all those toxins out of your system to see what you really tolerate. Well, guess what? I've done that before and I didn't notice much of a difference. So we're not all the same, folks. Like some of us can tolerate a lot of these foods. And by the way, the science says most of these foods are perfectly edible, perfectly healthy, in moderation. So going back to the toxin is the dose, or the dosage is the poison. So how long it takes to regulate and get used to high carbs, I would say within a few weeks for most people. That's my short answer. If I have a client who all of a sudden eats more carbs, it doesn't take long before they do it and they start to enjoy it and they start to say, whoa, like you're right about this stuff. Like I have more energy. I can lift more. I was stuck on my bench for months or years and all of a sudden I'm up, 5 pounds on my bench last week or 10 pounds, whatever. Same thing happened to me. I mean, I did them both at the same time, so it's kind of tough to tease out the variables. But because I was actually eating more on purpose, and for years and years and years, I had been like restricting. I did that combined with strength training, exactly what I do with my clients now when they get started. And it was just like, oh, everything started to take off like never before, right? All my lifts just went up 5-10 pounds every time for a few weeks. And then it kind of leveled off a little and then kept going for a while after that before I had to go to more intermediate programming. So yes, you'll get an immediate weight gain. It's all fluid because energy balance is the only thing that should be taken account when it comes to fat. And you can do the math and you can see that if you're eating your maintenance calories, then anything you're gaining is probably not fat. It's probably fluid, period. Same thing when you take creatine. So Jimmy, thanks for the question. Shout out to you. I'm trying to see if I missed anything. You get a better pump. You get a much better pump in the gym. I mean, you will lose that altogether if that's important to you. And for a lot of us, that's like a great feeling. What else? You get better energy, sleep, mental clarity in many cases. I did a whole episode recently about cortisol, the connection between carbs and cortisol. Like so many things improve just because of the increase in carbs that you wouldn't realize until you do it, let alone the performance in the gym for sure. I mean, I know this because as soon as I go on a diet, even if the calories aren't that low, the carbs come way down, I take a hit. Or if I let's say I don't have as much or any pre-workout for whatever reason because of my circumstances, I'll notice it, right? Don't get enough sleep, you'll notice it. I think I covered your question, so I'm going to move on to the next one. The next one is from Luke P. He says, what benefits do you get from low carb versus high carb? High carb is not always better, I'm assuming. So I was thinking of how to answer this question. I already talked about how the carbs are the main thing that changes when you go from gaining to maintaining to losing, right? So my approach, my philosophy is as long as you've got your protein, the fats and carbs are pretty flexible and there's no reason to lower the carbs just to lower carbs. Does that make sense? In other words, even when you are in a fat loss phase, we don't lower the carbs because low carbs better. We lower them because we don't have space for enough carbs, right? We need our protein and our fat. In some cases, I actually want somebody to slightly lower their protein and increase their carbs if it gives them just that burst of energy they need. I guess what I'm saying is that all things equal, I would generally never want to lower carbs for the sake of it for any reason, but I would want to increase carbs for many reasons. So when we say low carb and high carb, it's kind of like protein. It's very misleading. Like people talk about high protein. Well, most people are eating extremely, extremely low protein, and I want people to eat moderate protein. But it looks high compared to the average population. I mean, whoa, 25% of your calories is protein. That's huge. Well, it's only 25%. So is that really high protein or is it just much higher than the population? Similarly with carbs, like to me, if I'm getting a lot of protein and plenty of fat and then I'm eating 400 grams of carbs, is that high carb or is it just what I need and like filling in the rest of the energy equation, right? So when you say high carb is not always better, I would agree with that statement when we are talking about the context of other macros. So if the carbs are taking away from your protein or fats in a detrimental way, then it's not better. But there's no case where I would say you need to lower your carbs just to lower your carbs. Does that make sense? So hopefully I answered that. Like the research definitely supports higher carbs for muscle building across the board. Like any study we see comparing low carb to a moderate high carb, the moderate high carb wins out for sure when it comes to muscle building. So like that to me is not a question anymore. And I see it anecdotally all the time. Having said that, if you just don't like to eat a lot of carbs and it doesn't hurt you to lower the carbs and it gives you more protein because you're a big protein eater, that is a scenario I can get behind. And I know plenty of lifters like that who want to eat 250 grams of protein or 300 grams of protein and kind of moderate carbs. I like 200 something grams of carbs. I'm like, yeah, you got a lot of flex there and that's okay. That's okay. So that's my thoughts on that is what are the trade-offs? What are your goals?
Hi, my name is Alan, and I just want to give a shout out to Philip Pape of Wits and Weights for being a huge part of the foundation for my continued health and well-being. Philip exemplifies a nutrition coach who demonstrates how much he cares. Philip works tirelessly and with dedication to provide coaching support and major content for us to use. He creates a practical approach from research, and Philip empowers all of us to use food as quality for our health. He is skilled in how to assess and direct nutrition. Philip creates a community full of wisdom, support, and camaraderie. In summary, Philip Pape is the real deal. He knows how to assess and direct nutrition, and he continues to steer me in the right direction. Thank you, Philip.
Emily asked a question about timing and travel. She said, timing overall, what is your timing of carbs? Do you eat more in the AM or PM? I'm going to answer her questions one at a time. So timing of carbs, I distribute them evenly when I'm not dieting. When I'm in fat loss, however, I shift them to the morning because that's around my workout. If it's a non-training day, I tend to eat them spread out evenly as well. Simple, right? It's as simple as that. Now, if you are the type of person who trains first thing in the morning and doesn't want to eat, which there's a small percentage of people that do that, you want a lot of carbs with your dinner. If you're the type of person that sleeps better with carbs at your meal, you want them at dinner. If you're the type of person that needs the carbs after your workout to recover from being drained of your glycogen, you might want more carbs after your workout. You get what I'm saying? It depends. So me personally, distribute it evenly, except on training days, or except during fat loss, in which case more percentage of it, like up to 50% of my carbs are going to be around training. And that's what I recommend. When your carbs are tight, put more of them around your training and experiment with before and after. Also experiment with for sleep time for dinner. You asked, what are my favorite carbs near my workout? Just in general, what are your go-to pre or post-workout snacks and or meals? I am super boring and simple. I eat a banana and a protein shake beforehand, and then I have some oatmeal with peanut butter afterward, and then lunch is not far behind to get more of my protein. I like to have a lot of protein with my lunch and dinner. And because I'm having a nice big protein shake before my workout, I don't need a lot of protein right after it, right? There's no such thing as the anabolic window anymore. You could distribute your protein however you want. The carbs are a little bit more important. So when we're talking carbs specifically, I love fruit before the workout because I can have it as close as like half an hour before my workout, very fast digesting. And then after my workout, I like something a little more fiber, a little more tasty and comfort food style, which is where the oatmeal comes in. And plus a little bit of fat and taste from the peanut butter. I will say if I am gaining, I need even more calories. I will also add in HBCD, highly branched cyclic dextrin. It is a extremely digestible, very easy on the stomach form of carbs, powder form that pretty much anyone can tolerate. And it is a great intro workout as well. You can sip it or have it before I actually put it before, during, and after when I'm gaining and trying to eat like 4,000 calories. Carbs on travel, you asked. This is still Emily. It's so easy to lose track when working and not controlling meals. Also, buffets at meetings tend to be carb heavy. What are your strategies? And socially, how do you track without a scale next to your boss? Okay, there's a lot of questions here. I guess it could be a whole topic on its own. And it's funny because I think, Emily, you and I just talked about this on a group call in Physique University. And I think that was about going to track meets or something, right? Where you didn't have enough time between traveling and everything to have the food you wanted. And it was like 4 hours and they had hot dogs and other stuff staring you in the face, right? So it really does come down to meal planning, meal prepping, and the logistics of it all. So you've got to just think ahead, use if-then strategies. Like if you know this is going to happen twice a week then what is your strategy? Is it to have like a cooler ready to go and then you pop it in your car? Is it to have snack type foods in your purse? That is it. For me, I know what you're talking about. Buffets at meetings tend to be carb heavy, and they're not always like the carbs that we want. They're often like muffins and stuff. Maybe they're bagels or something. So if you know you're going to eat the meeting food, just again, you got to plan for it and say, maybe I'm going to bring my, first 4 meat sticks or something for my protein, or protein bar or something to go along with it. If they don't have meat options, sometimes there'll be sandwiches and you can like grab a bunch of the cold cuts and maybe eat half the bread if you're not trying to get that many carbs. But it's planning. It's planning and like having if-then strategies. That's really all it is. Your last question about tracking without a scale and next to your boss. So 2 options. One is just take a picture or eyeball it and estimate. I mean, I do that all the time now. It's a skill that you build over time. You're like, okay, this is a turkey sandwich and this is pasta salad, right? Or whatever the buffet food is. Or if it's just a lunch you packed and you didn't pre-measure it, which you could pre-measure it if it's at home, but if somebody cooked for you, again, just estimate each of the main ingredients that have calories and put them in as grams. MacroFactor has a new AI feature where you can take a picture and it'll do it for you. It's like 90% accurate, which is plenty good enough for most people. And there's a text box, so you can tell it generally what's in there, like what do you see, so it can be more accurate. Those are things you can do. All right, next question. This is from Alan F. All right, Mr. Allen, everybody knows him from the Facebook group for sure, and also Physique University. He says, did you give thought to the glycemic index of the carbs you were utilizing? And then another question, did you have a priority list of carbohydrate foods you were incorporating? I'm going to answer that one because it's easier. My priority list is just the simple list of foods that I like. That's it. So like if I were to provide some nuance on that, because this could be why you're asking somewhat, is different foods have different levels of macros, right? Like, so rice is pure carbs, just like shrimp is pure protein, essentially. Beans, however, are carbs and protein. So if I were to prioritize, if I'm absolutely trying to have pure carbs, I'm going to have things like fruit and oats. Well, oats have protein too, but never hurts to have protein. Rice, simple starches. They could be refined whole grains, but I mean simple, like breads and pastas and whatnot. And it's just like I would do if I was trying to have dairy that was more protein than not. I would look at the protein density. Same thing with carbs. What's the carb density? And then I don't stray from that. Like I'm fairly boring. I like to explore occasionally in the grocery store, but usually I just stick to, okay, here are my like 5 favorite fruits. Here are like my 5 or 6 favorite vegetables. I like oats. I like rice. Keep it simple. I know you are very, I'll say you love to explore the variety of foods out there and do lots of fancy recipes, just like Carol does in the group. And that's awesome too, right? If that's what you love to do. But going back to your first question, did you give thought to the glycemic index of the carbs? The answer is no, but I used to. So I'm glad you brought that up because I fell prey to a lot of these silly little things. Like I say silly, like I was going to say blood sugar, and that's going to offend a lot of people. I think blood sugar is important, but I don't think it takes a lot to do it right and then not have to think about it. In other words, like if you eat balanced meals and you have a lot of fiber, you're going to take care of your blood sugar as long as you're training, right? As long as you're lifting weights and walking. So I don't like give too much thought to it. I know some coaches and some folks even I've had on my show, like they focus on that, and it can be a valuable tool for people who aren't aware of it, because then it says, okay, how do I improve that? But glycemic index has to do with, insulin or blood sugar spikes as well. That's why I bring this up. Insulin sensitivity, all of that. It doesn't matter. Once I discovered through learning the science that if you're lifting weights and you're walking inactive, that you're going to be highly insulin sensitive, it didn't matter. I could even eat a pure carb meal. My blood sugar will spike and it's fine. When I'm low on calories, I don't do that though, because what'll happen is I'll get like an energy crash. And many of you listening, if you feel that like 3 p.m. energy crash, sometimes you go for a high energy food like a candy bar, right? Or chips or whatever for that reason, because your body's craving the energy. But if you have balanced meals that are always protein and fiber first, you don't have to worry about glycemic index at all. And for anybody who knows GI, you know that it's like averaged out for the meal. So if you're having protein and fiber in there and some fats and whatever, it's going to bring the whole GI down for the meal. If you're diabetic, it's a different situation. You may have to be more conscious of it. So the answer is I went down those rabbit holes sometimes, but I was just trying to avoid carbs in general. I wasn't like, oh, give me the low GI carbs, not the high. No, I didn't do that. If that's a concern for you, I'm not the guy necessarily to talk to, because I don't think it's necessary for most people. if you're training, lifting, or if you're training, walking, eating balanced meals. Yeah. And then nutrient density. Yeah. So I think that's it. I think glycemic load is what we call it, right? The context of the whole food matrix. That's more important. Okay. Next question is from Alex B. So this is going back to our original listener who wrote in. And this is another part of her question. She said, I think it's a combo of habit and learned fear or anxiety response from years of indoctrination. I know better, but knowledge only gets you so far. I've done the prepping, but not logging ahead. There are basically always potatoes, beans, and bread ready to go. In any case, I think you're right. I don't have a knowledge gap, but an accountability one. And I and many others default to maladaptive habits and systems even when we know better. So I wanted to throw this in and kind of close the loop on all of this, because for many of us, myself included, no matter how much we know the right thing is to do, we need that accountability. And accountability comes in so many ways, right? You can even build self-accountability by using an app. Like I use MacroFactor. Initially, for my first year and a half of nutrition, I just used that. Then my accountability came in the form of getting a coaching certification, having clients, and I have worked with coaches like informally for my nutrition as well. I haven't actually worked one-on-one with a nutrition coach for a period of time. I've been thinking about it for some of the advanced things, but at the same time, I'm confident in my nutrition. And this is the thing, you got to assess, like if you really enjoy something and you love learning about it and you're able to be consistent with it, then you're good. You're good. If, however, something like strength training, you're constantly missing your training sessions, constantly moving things around, never sure what to follow, like you just have all this uncertainty and lack of confidence around it, or you feel frustrated and inconsistent, that's where you need something, whether that is a free Facebook group, a friend or accountability partner, a coach, a community, paid, free. It doesn't, like they're all different forms. Obviously, I provide various forms of this because everyone has different budgets and needs and whatnot. And some people can shift between them, right? I've had folks that came into the Facebook group, link in the show notes, totally free. They saw what things were about. They started to learn. They started to listen to the podcast and they're like, okay, interesting. Well, I have this really big goal and I'm kind of struggling to get there, even though I know what to do. Let me join Physique University and get motivated by people, but also be able to reach out to Philip and get some more personalized guidance, have a plan, have a way to diagnose issues along the way. And they'll do that and they'll get a great result. Or they'll do that and they'll say, all right, I'm getting a result, but I have these very specific issues for me related to my hormones, my thyroid medications, my age, my equipment access. Maybe I'm kind of shy and I don't want to be sharing everything with a group, right? Like there's different reasons. And they'll say, okay, I want to work with you one-on-one. Or again, there are things in your life where you may be able to hold yourself accountable. It's all different. It's a spectrum. So why I brought this up, Alex, is because she acknowledged that she has the knowledge, but has a lot of habits and they're hard to break sometimes without that accountability. So I just signed up a couple clients this week, in fact, who are very much like that. They are advanced clients. Like they have been training and learning and applying nutrition and tracking macros and everything for years and have gotten great results. Some of them have competed, in bodybuilding and stuff like that, but they know that they can learn more. And there's always subtle things that they need to reach out to someone else for. Okay. Anyway, behavior change is so important in this space. The role of like cognitive dissonance, where what we believe doesn't match what we're experiencing and we're trying to resolve that when it comes to shifting our diets, is really, really important, along with the role of community and accountability. All right. I think this episode is way past the time I wanted it to be. Hopefully I'm able to edit it to be shorter, but I think the big thought from all of this, and I don't even know if I covered half my story, to be honest, is that what I finally learned around 2021 when I launched the podcast was that the sustainability and the flexibility are the main driver of all of this, like your ability to adapt and go with the flow and go with life. And if what you're doing does not have that flexibility, it's going to be a problem at some point. It's going to be a problem. I guarantee it. If you're following strict keto or any other highly restrictive approach, and don't tell me carnivore is like just wonderful and it works for you and it solved all your problems and I could do this the rest of my life. Maybe 0.1% of people, but in reality, you come to me a year later and tell me that you're still eating only these 3 foods. I'm using a little exaggeration, I realize, but it's kind of what it is. It's kind of like a kid who only eats like 6 things, right? Doesn't eat their fruits and vegetables. That's carnivore. But any of these approaches are highly restrictive. And when you're living that way, you know what? It's stressing you out. You are in this state of like constant vigilance. Like, what can I eat? What's the next poison or toxin lurking around the corner that I have to avoid? Man, isn't that stressful? Doesn't that sound awful, like an awful way to live. And if you're living right that way right now, why do it to yourself, right? Every single time you eat, you're like, it's this Machiavellian calculation combined with extreme discipline and willpower. Social events are these minefields where it's all temptation. Like every social event, all it feels like is constant temptation and saying no. And the mental bandwidth that you have to maintain that is just enormous. It's enormous. So now I'm getting on my soapbox here because it's a call to action to anyone listening that you can have it all. You can balance your approach to all of this. You can include carbs. You can get nutritional freedom. You just have to have the flexibility. And, you can still track macros, prioritize protein, make whole food choices, but without rigid rules that govern every bite. Like it's guardrails, it's structure, it's targets, it's ranges. It's not eat this, not that. It is very different. If you want to argue with me that it's the same, I'd like you to try them both out and tell me that they are the same. And if they are to you, then that's your experience. And even with that, I would say that there are other ways to have those guardrails and flexibility, just with a slightly different approach or method that doesn't require cutting foods out, right? And so instead of thinking, okay, I need to follow this diet, think, how do I build a sustainable lifestyle that supports my goals, right? That enhances what I'm doing. Quality of life is so important. It's so important, right? And you got to live with what you're doing and be happy with it. You don't want to just tolerate with misery what you're doing. Think about it. Are you just tolerating your diet right now? Are you miserable? Or are you living with it happily? And, I don't mean roses and sunshine and it's perfect every day. Of course, I don't mean that. I mean, you're satisfied. You're like, yeah, I can do this the rest of my life. There's always a little effort involved with everything, of course, but this is way more freeing and flexible than the other approaches. So I guess as we wrap up this self-interview, but I guess it ended up being a Q&A, what I want to emphasize is that I was looking for a diet, like the one true diet for years, right? Keto, Atkins, I didn't even mention Slim Fast, but I did that, Paleo. And at the end of the day, it wasn't about the right diet. It was about the right approach for me, which means your diet itself evolves. So it's principle-based rather than method-based. And that means you can have multiple nutritional approaches, not only for different people, but for you at different stages, for different times of the year, for different contexts and objectives and goals. That's the power of all this, because now you're not fixed into one approach. So let's say you're currently thriving on a low carb approach and it aligns with your goals. Fantastic. Like, I'm not going to judge you for that, right? But if you're staying low carb because of fear rather than like preferences or results even, I hope this gives you the permission you want to experiment, to evolve your approach. That's what we are all about, because the social media world, the nutrition world is just full of zealots who promote their preferred diet as the only way to eat. They do it for views, for clicks, for engagement, and for money. And I'm not against money. I'm a capitalist through and through. I love money, just like you. But I wouldn't do this shameful self-promotion and something that actually harms people for that. Now, I've been the person who talks people's ear off about how great low carb is. This is before it ever became a business for me. And in hindsight, it was exhausting and isolating. And I think there's tremendous freedom in letting go of dogma of any kind, dietary dogma, training dogma, and embrace the idea of flexibility. Not that we're all special snowflakes or anything like that. We're all like super, super, super unique, that what works for you doesn't work for me. The principles are there. The principles are universal. It's the dogma of fixed methods and approaches. Okay. Anyway, I'm rambling again. I think that your relationship with food should be a great part of your life. Like, it should just be a good, fun part of your life and something you enjoy, not constraining. Your diet serves you. It's not the other way around. Your knowledge is going to continue to grow as your experience grows, as you listen to podcasts, get involved in communities, learn. The evidence is going to keep changing as well. What we know about the evidence, I should say. And that's, to me, very exciting. So if you found value today, if you stuck through this long, if you want to continue the conversation, just join our Facebook group. That's all I'm going to ask today. Just search for it in Facebook or click the link in the show notes. And that is where questions like the ones we covered today get discussed all the time. You can share your journey with carbs or any other diet you want. Some people are there who are doing carnivore and they're like, yeah, I love it. That's great. Come in there. We're not going to judge you. We're going to present all the evidence and let you decide for yourself. As long as you experiment, promise me that you will try, that you will make an attempt and not just assume something will or won't work until you've tried it. And if you haven't tried it, you have no right to make the claim. That's in my opinion. So you're going to find support there. You're not going to find judgment. That's my point. So Wits and Weights Facebook group, link in the show notes, and I look forward to seeing you there. Until next time, keep using your wits, lifting those weights, and remember, the best diet isn't the one with the most zealous following. It's the one that works for your body and your goals and your life. I'll talk to you next time here on the Wits and Weights podcast.